When Ronald Reagan was asked about his strategy for the Cold War, he had a simple answer: we win, they lose. Reagan was crystal clear about the Soviet Union and its intentions. But today, few people understand the Chinese Communist Party is waging a no-holds-barred people's war on America.
We need to design a strategy to respond to their actions in this new Cold War and win this new Cold War.
China is making a lot of inroads in the global south, in large part because it's so affordable.
We Win, They Lose is the title of a new book by Matthew Kronig and Dan Negrea, both working with the Atlantic Council. They outline what such a Reagan-esque foreign policy, updated for today, would look like. Kronig is Vice President and Senior Director of the Scrowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and Negrea is Senior Director of the Freedom and Prosperity Center. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Dan Negrea, Matt Kronig, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
So, the title of your book, We Win, They Lose. I think even that today is a kind of a controversial statement. It seems so absolutist, right? Of course, this is how Reagan framed his foreign policy towards the Soviet Union back in the day. But how can you justify that kind of an approach today?
Well, as you point out, that was Reagan's statement. He was asked what is his strategy for the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and he said it's simple. Some might say it's simplistic, but it's we win, they lose. And he followed that clear strategic vision, and through that won the first Cold War. Now we're in a new Cold War with communist China. People are trying to figure out what the strategy is. The Biden administration says that its strategy is to responsibly manage the competition. And Dan and I didn't think that seemed quite right. What is the goal for our competition with China? And so we looked back to Reagan's model and said, no, the goal again today should be that we win and they lose. And how we can justify it, I think it's pretty simple. Do the American people, does the rest of the world benefit from having the United States and our democratic allies leading the international system? Or would we be better off with a genocidal, nuclear-armed communist dictatorship running the world? And I think the answer to that is pretty clear. So that's how we justify it.
And you're right, Jan, the title is strong and maybe even provocative. But I think we are in sobering times. Robert Gates, a very distinguished public servant, and he served in both Republican and Democrat administrations, and he also is a distinguished civil servant. He said this is the most dangerous international environment in decades, and perhaps ever. And other people have raised this point also. This is not a time for half measures. We need clarity.
So the criticism that might be thrown at you immediately, right, is that this would be, and I'll use this term very kind of glibly, I guess, that this is sort of a neocon approach, which is, approach that has been, given that what you're advocating for is a Reagan-Trump foreign policy fusion, as I understand it, what you're advocating for is something more like a neocon approach.
Well, I think it's the opposite. The neocon view of the world was that America should go out, and to borrow a phrase from the early days of the Republic, looking for dragons to slay, finding dictatorships and causing change in those countries, to promote freedom by force of arms, forcing countries to go into a certain direction. What we make very clear in our book is that our policy is in response to the aggressive actions of what we call the new axis of evil, which is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, which are countries that are not only revisionist but also expansionist. They are not only proposing theories and staying within their borders, but they are invading foreign countries or threatening to invade our foreign countries, or causing harm to the vital national interests of the United States. And in response to their actions, the United States, and as leader of the free world working with other freedom-loving countries, we need to design a strategy to respond to their actions in this new Cold War and win this new Cold War. But it is not us initiating the conflict. It's a conflict that came to us that we just simply cannot ignore or avoid.
If I could add to that, a central argument of the book is this idea of a Trump-Reagan fusion in conservative foreign policy. How do you take the traditional principles of Reaganism and update them for the Trump era? And we point out that actually Reagan and Trump had a lot in common, both as individuals and in terms of policies. And one of those things is peace through strength. The idea that the United States should be so strong that other adversaries don't mess with us. If they do mess with us, we're willing to punch back hard. But that they were skeptical, I think, of drawn-out nation-building campaigns militarily that we associate with the George W. Bush administration. They're also skeptical, I think, of what they would see as too timid and weak an approach from Democrats and from the Biden administration. So I'd say it's not a neocon approach. I agree with Dan. It's the opposite. It's kind of skipping over the W. Bush administration and arguing that actually Trump has a lot more in common with the traditions in the conservative movement, including peace through strength. One example that we haven't talked about yet is trade policy, where everyone criticized Trump for being protectionist, and this is a radical break from Reagan, who was a free trader. And we point out in the book that actually Reagan also used protectionist policies, tariffs against the Japanese and others, but with the purpose of bringing about free trade. And that's exactly what Trump was doing. He wasn't putting in place tariffs for their own sake. He was putting in place tariffs against countries, China, but also others that were cheating on the global trading system and trying to bring about freer trade. He was very clear about that, trying to get a better deal for the American people. And he pursued trade negotiations and even had 2 successful trade agreements updated, the Chorus Agreement with South Korea and then the new U.S., Canada, Mexico free trade agreement. So I think that's the purpose. It's to get to free and fair trade, not protectionism for its own sake.
Dan, I can't help but have noticed as we were getting to know each other that you're actually a defector from a communist regime yourself, and that has clearly informed a lot of your thinking. So I want to get you to take a moment just to tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up in America and how that informs your perspective.
So I was born in communist Romania, and I lived there until I was 24 years old. I got my graduate degree when I was 22 and worked for 2 years in the Ministry of Finance of Romania, working on relations with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And I came to Washington as part of the Romanian delegation to the annual meetings, and I asked for political asylum. And in one of those turns of fate that we can call only in America, 40 years later, while working at the Department of State, I was again a member of the delegation to the World Bank and IMF annual meetings, but this time part of the US delegation. But in a very important way, I'm influenced in how I look at the world by my experience under communism, which is just recognize the mindset of communism, which is expansionist, which is looking to create a world dominated by the authoritarians in power in those countries. And also the realization that there is evil. Not that all countries are fine and there are misunderstandings. If we only sat down and had a nice conversation and we'll sort things out. There is evil. I experienced that. I knew what regimes with a totalitarian mindset and an expansionist point of view can do.
But what prompted you to leave at that moment, so many years ago? There was a time when I had hope that the Romanian communism would evolve in the direction of Yugoslavia, which was a communist country and independent from the Soviet Union in its foreign policy, the way Romania was also, but that allowed an element of free enterprise and some
freedoms. But then the dictator of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, went to China, and he saw the cult of personality under Mao and said, this is a great thing. I think I'll imitate it in Romania, which he did, which didn't go well with the Romanian people, and he was toppled and shot. But other than that, it was a successful regime.
You focus in this book on something that I'm quite passionate about, which is American exceptionalism. And there's frankly a lot of questions out there right now, and I think quite legitimate questions, like has American exceptionalism really stood the test of time? Does it still exist today? Should America be the leader of the free world, right? That fits into that question. You saw something in America then. Do you still see that today?
So it's not only that I see this as still very much alive, because you may say I have the passion of a convert, or I may be biased, which I most certainly am, but the millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants into this country who cross deserts and jungles and rivers, and they risk death and rape on the way of coming here, but they still dream of coming to America, which is still the beacon of freedom, still the land of the free, the country of exception. So it is very much alive, and I see no change in that in the future. But I'm sure Matt can give a much more learned answer on American exceptionalism.
Well, I can give some stats. I think if you just look at the data, you see that the United States is exceptional. It's the most powerful country in the world by far still, economically, militarily, and other measures. And then after World War II, the system that the United States created globally, the kind of the US-led system, has been remarkable in terms of the results. 0 great power wars in 70 years, average standard of living in the United States and internationally 5 times today what it was in 1945. In 1945, there were only 12 democracies on Earth. Now there are almost 100 democratic countries on Earth. So this period of US leadership has made the world safer, richer, and freer. It's essentially the best system ever invented for running global affairs. And you know, to the critics, I guess I'd say, what is the better system? Would it have been better if Nazi Germany won World War II? Would it have been better if the Soviet Union had won the Cold War? Would it be better if communist China dominated the world today? And I think the answer to all of those questions is clearly no. So then where does this skepticism of American exceptionalism come from? And I think it's that, especially on the left, but not only, people have some kind of ideal standard in mind, and the United States is not living up to this utopia, and so they criticize it. But I think that's unfair. I think you have to look at what are the historical alternatives, what are the plausible alternatives today, and clearly there is no better system than one where the United States does play an important leadership role.
If I may add something, America has an empire by invitation. Countries want America to come and be involved. There is this comedy in the 1950s called The Mouse That Roared, about this little country in Europe that was about to go bankrupt, and the solution that they found was this: let's declare war on the United States, because after we surrender they will come and they will be so generous with the country that they defeated, because look what they did with Europe, with Germany and with Japan. So this is a great thing. If you look at the behavior not just of these millions of people who are putting their lives at risk to come to America, but even governments. Look at European governments. The greatest terror in European chancelleries these days is that America may withdraw from Europe. You know, they created the European Union. They said, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. Not just people, but countries want America present. In developed countries and in developing countries, they know that American enterprise is coming there, create development by using local labor forces and introducing higher standards and bringing economic growth.
You guys, you use an interesting term that I hadn't really been familiar with, but it's captured my imagination. There's America first, and then there's blame America first.
Well, I think the United States does have real problems, for sure, and American exceptionalism isn't to say the United States is perfect. We have a lot of problems domestically, fentanyl overdoses, a lot of problems internationally. But I think one of the things that is different about the United States is our ability for self-correction. We had this strategy of engaging China for many decades. It probably took us too long to recognize it, but by 2017, the Trump administration did recognize this isn't working. We need a new approach. Instead of engaging China, it's time to compete with China. So to maybe quote Winston Churchill, the United States always does the right thing after trying everything else. So we do make mistakes, but I think our ability to self-correct is superior to any other country on earth.
So I want to talk about this most dangerous situation, like Robert Gates said, that we live in this most dangerous international situation in quite some time. Presumably you agree with that, and if you could, justify that for me, like explain to me why you think that.
So I was talking to Matt about this actually this morning. We started working on this book in 2021. I mean, shortly after I left the Trump administration, and I joined Matt at the Atlantic Council. And we put in the title that we are in a new Cold War. Who are we facing in this new Cold War? It's a new, we coined the term new axis of evil. That includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. At that time, we were a little bit avant-garde with this term. We are now in an environment in which someone respected like General McMaster, who was National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, said we are on the cusp of the Third World War. There are people who are talking about how this environment reminds them of the 1930s, where disparate conflicts in different parts of the world by different powers actually ended up in a global conflagration. What is becoming clearer to people since we sent the book to the publisher in October after the massacre in Israel, and as it became very clear how Iran and North Korea are helping Russia, how Russia and China are supporting Iran, how the Houthis are stopping ships, are attacking ships, but not from all kinds of countries, but not from Russia and China. It's becoming clear that between the countries of the new axis of evil there is coordination, and that they are together a threat to the peace of the world.
And I would just add to that, I agree, and also point out that China is the most capable adversary the United States has ever faced. If you just look at their share of global GDP, they're more capable than the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany ever were. So just if this were just the US and China, I think there'd be a case to be made that this is the most dangerous period we've ever faced. But as Dan points out, it's not just China, it's also Russia, Iran, North Korea. We have a major war in Europe right now, a major war in the Middle East. We may be on the verge of a major war in the Indo-Pacific. China's building a military to go to war with the United States. Xi has been very clear that the military option is on the table to take Taiwan. And so needing to be able to deter and, God forbid, defeat multiple nuclear-armed autocratic adversaries at the same time is essentially the national security situation we face right now. And so it's very, very dangerous indeed.